Hola, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en este webinar que es titulado How to Expand Your Business into the USA. Nuestro webinar de hoy está organizado por la oficina de Russell Bedford Ciudad de México con la firma estadounidense PW Associates, que está ubicada en Texas. Bueno, buenos días a todos, me presento con ustedes. Mi nombre es Jorge Hugo Paniagua Aguilar y soy socio de la Ciudad de México. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en este webinar hoy 27 de julio del 2021. Como ya lo mencionaba, la oficina Russell Bedford Ciudad de México durante los últimos años ha venido forjando una alianza con la firma estadounidense PW Associates, PLC, a cargo de nuestro buen amigo y socio director CPA Steve Williams. Y derivado de esta alianza, tanto Russell Bedford como PW Associates, presentaremos este webinar el día de hoy con el título ¿Cómo abrir o expandir tu negocio en Estados Unidos? A continuación presentaré a nuestros panelistas invitados. En primer lugar tendremos a Steve Williams, que es el socio director de PW Associates, CPAs, y proporciona orientación comercial, financiera y fiscal a las empresas estadounidenses y a propietarios internacionales con inversiones en Estados Unidos. Steve es ex socio de una Big Four en Calgary, Canadá, y más recientemente se desempeñó como socio líder fiscal en Houston para Haynes Associates. Tiene una licenciatura en contabilidad de la Universidad de Brigham Young, así como un MBA de la Universidad de Notre Dame. Steve es miembro de la Sociedad de CPAs de Texas, así como del Instituto Americano de CPAs. En segundo lugar tendremos también de PWA a Sara Rosales, que es directora de marketing de PWA y es responsable de la generación de clientes potenciales, la actualización del sitio web, la divulgación de nuevos clientes y la gestión de la presencia en línea de PWA Associates. Sara tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en consultoría, concretamente en los campos de marketing y la gestión de proyectos, incluyendo más de 10 años trabajando internacionalmente, principalmente con clientes en México. Sara tiene una licenciatura en comunicaciones de la Universidad Anáhuac con especialidad en comunicación de organización. También tendremos hoy de Carris Legal a Jonathan Carris, quien es un abogado con más de 15 años de experiencia en impuestos, contabilidad pública, legal, enfocado principalmente en créditos fiscales e incentivos negociados. John es miembro del Colegio de Abogados del Estado de Texas, del Colegio de Abogados del Estado de Connecticut, del Tribunal Fiscal de los Estados Unidos, del Tribunal de Distrito Norte de Texas en Estados Unidos y del Tribunal de Apelaciones del Quinto Circuito también en USA. John se ha desempeñado como miembro de la Junta Directiva de la Asociación de Contribuyentes e Investigación de Texas y realizó su licenciatura en la Universidad de Brigham Young y su GDA en Western New England University, Escuela de Leyes. Y finalmente tendremos de Wood Bagnovsky a David Wood, quien ha ejercido el derecho corporativo de fusiones, adquisiciones y de valores durante más de 30 años. La experiencia de David ha incluido trabajos de fusiones y adquisiciones, colocaciones privadas y ofertas públicas, cumplimiento de valores, formación de entidades y asuntos corporativos generales. Sus clientes incluyen empresas extranjeras que invierten y adquieren empresas en los Estados Unidos, así como clientes estadounidenses que operan en otras naciones, incluyendo México. Recibió su bachelor y un doctorado con honores de la Universidad de Texas en Austin, donde fue editor asociado de Texas Law Review. También David es miembro de los colegios de abogados de Texas y Dallas y se desempeñó como miembro del consejo de la sección de asesoría corporativa del Colegio de Abogados de Dallas. Es muy importante hoy recalcarles a todos ustedes que nuestra plática de hoy o nuestro webinar es muy general. Por lo tanto, existirán aspectos muy específicos que cada uno de ustedes pudiera tener en sus negocios. Sin embargo, los invitamos a que nos contacten en caso de que en este webinar no llegáramos a cubrir algunos de sus cuestionamientos o comentarios. Sin embargo, con todo gusto lo podremos hacer. También es importante que consideren que deben estar siempre apoyados por profesionales en Estados Unidos, los cuales los tendremos como invitados el día de hoy. Es muy importante siempre estar con gente que conozca acerca del tema. Bueno, les agradezco mucho y sin más, les damos la cordial bienvenida a los panelistas el día de hoy. Guys, please go ahead with your presentation and thank you.
Muchas gracias, Hugo. Soy David Wood y soy abogado de negocios en Wood Banofsky. Tenemos oficinas en Dallas y Denver, Colorado. Y muchas gracias por atender a este webinar hoy. Y hablo muy bien español roto, solo siento solo inglés ahora. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Hugo and the team at Russell Bedford for inviting me to present to you today. And I'm also grateful to be co-presenting with John and Steve, and you'll hear from them a little later on. Finally, thanks a lot to Sarah Rosales for her help. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again today about some of the legal aspects of doing business in the United States as a foreign company or foreign entity. I'll focus mostly on business and corporate aspects of doing business in the US, but we'll also touch on some of the other legal areas that you must consider when you're coming into the United States. Again, one of the most important things is to consult with your CPAs, legal counsel, trusted advisors, both in your home country and in the United States, to make sure we're doing things most efficiently for you from a tax perspective, liability perspective, and best able to contribute to your future success. So the next slide, please, Sarah. So this is just a short disclaimer. The material we're presenting is only for information. These are very complicated areas, so please don't consider this specific legal, accounting, tax advice for your specific company, and we won't be officially lawyer client or accounting client until we have a formal engagement letter. So just as always, it's good to talk to people before you jump. Next slide, please, Sarah. So after that brief introduction, a few of the critical considerations when you're looking at coming into the United States is choosing a state. We've got 50 states plus the District of Columbia. So it's important early on to decide what state you want to go into, which jurisdiction is best for your company. The second point we'll cover is the choice of entity. There's different options, corporations, LLCs, partnerships, and each of those has got its own pros and cons. Then next, we'll kind of go quickly through some other legal considerations. There's immigration, intellectual property, taxes. There's, as I'm sure you know from doing business in your own state, or your own country, there's 1,000 things to think about. And then just to reiterate, always consult with your trustees, CPAs, and lawyers. Next slide, please. So the first thing to think about if you're deciding you want to do business in the United States is which of the states do you want to go into? Generally with our clients, we recommend that you look carefully both at where you are today, where you want to be tomorrow, where you want to be in the future. If you're going to have a lot of operations, buildings, facilities, sales offices, employees in one specific state, it usually would make sense to incorporate in that state. And then you'll also have to qualify to do business in other states if you're going to do a lot of business there, and each state's got its own requirements for when you'd have to qualify. But generally, we look at incorporating, forming your entity in the state where you're mostly going to be operating, because they'll definitely get you in there. And then if you form, say, in Delaware, where a lot of companies form, but you operate in, say, Texas or another state, you still have to qualify in those states. So you have 2 sets of tax returns each year, 2 corporate filings initially, 2 annual reports every year. So it's just more efficient generally if you're going to be in one state, probably form yourself in that state. Delaware is kind of a special situation. Most public companies are based in Delaware. It's got a very well-developed system of business laws and statutes. They have courts that specialize only in corporate disputes. You know, in Texas, your judge may hear a divorce case one day and then your critical corporate case the next day, and then the slip and fall the next day injury. So they don't have the expertise that Delaware is deemed to have. Then Delaware also, if your plans include something like having a venture capital investor put money into your company or private equity investor invest in your company, those are both great outcomes. But generally, they like to see Delaware corporations. They know it's a tried and true path. They know what the documents say, and it's just a lot more efficient. The good news is if you start in one state, because that's where your operations are, it's fairly easy to convert later on, reincorporate into Delaware from a Texas or Connecticut or wherever corporation or LLC or partnership into a Delaware corporation. So you can definitely handle that later when one of those fortunate happenstances comes to pass. I'm in Texas. We're neighbors to Mexico, so I always like Texas as a state to incorporate. We've got very friendly to business legislature, governor, lots of programs that John will touch on later to encourage companies from abroad to come invest in Texas. There's other states, Wyoming and Nevada particularly, that are perceived at least to have more of a secrecy. So if somebody's concerned about nobody knowing who you are, that's another consideration. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of other states, and depending on your specific business needs and business operations, it may make sense to look at other states. And they're all fairly similar, but each one will have its own little nuances. So it'd be important to talk to a lawyer in that state to make sure you're doing everything properly. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the next thing we're going to talk about is some of the common entities that you might look at if you want to do business in the United States. I would say most of our foreign clients tend to be C corporations. And again, you need to decide which state you're going to be in. So, generally a Delaware C corporation is pretty popular. We do Texas C corporations. There is another kind of corporation called an S corporation that has a different tax treatment. It passes through income and profit directly to its shareholders, but foreign persons are not allowed to be shareholders of S corps, nor are entities. So that wipes out the vast majority of our foreign clients that would look at being a corporation in the US. Generally speaking, corporations are formed by state again. So to form a C corporation, you file what's called either a certificate of incorporation or certificate of formation with the Secretary of State or other governing authority of that state. And that document would have the name of the company, which is important to get it right going in. You need to make sure no other existing companies have that name. You need to think about kind of in the future trademark issues, like you can't form a new company called Coca-Cola. So it's kind of important on the front end. It seems easy. What's the name of your entity? You might be able to use the name you have in your existing nation, if it's not already taken, if there's no trademark issues. The other stuff that the articles of incorporation would have are the number of shares that you'll have, the classes of shares. Is it just common or preferred? And the shares are issued to the shareholders, which are the owners of a C corporation. That could be just your entity. If it's wholly owned, if you're taking on investors, you could have different classes, common, preferred. The other things that would go in the certificate of formation include a registered agent. So you have to, if you don't have a live human employee existing in the States, you need to have a registered agent. And there's companies that serve as registered agents. They basically receive any correspondence from the state or, heaven forbid, lawsuit filings from disgruntled counterparties, and that has to be someone in that state. So unless you have an employee in the state that can sign up to take on that responsibility, we usually use outside services if they're not in your state. Another set of documents is the corporate bylaws. Those are the document that sets forth kind of how the corporation's operated day to day, how shareholder meetings are held, when and where, how they elect the board of directors. And the board of directors is responsible for overseeing the high level policies and setting the business direction. And then in turn, the board of directors, in the bylaws, this will have the board of directors can elect officers, presidents, vice presidents, secretary, treasurer, and those people are responsible for the day-to-day operations, kind of implementing the directives of the board of directors, who in turn are elected by the shareholders. So those are the two documents you almost always see. If you have more than one shareholder, so if you're setting up your entity in Texas and it's not going to be wholly owned by your company or your business, then you'd probably have a shareholder agreement that would govern the relations between your company as a shareholder and any other shareholders you might have. It might be employees that you want to give equity to. It might be a partner that you want to have vested in some equity. It might be an investor if you're going to bring in venture capital or private equity money. So the shareholder agreement would cover relations between the shareholders. It might be voting rights. You agree to vote for one of their people as director. They agree to vote for several of your people as directors. Would have buy-sell provisions, tag-along rights, drag-along rights, rights of first refusal. And those basically govern if one or the other shareholder wants to sell their shares in the future, making sure that the other shareholders, say your company in this instance, wouldn't get stuck with another partner that you don't want to be stuck with. You'd have the right to buy them out. So those are kind of the three main corporate documents. And then generally corporations, and Steve will get into this a little later, I think, but generally corporations, C corporations, are the route for foreign entities that are coming into the United States to operate. There's some tax considerations. It's something that investors are used to seeing. If you ever take the company public, it's a very normal way to go. Then the next set of possible entities are limited liability companies. Similar to a corporation, you form that by filing a certificate of formation with the Secretary of State of whatever state you decide to go into. And that certificate of formation is very basic. It'll have the name of the company, registered agent. It's skinnier than a articles of incorporation for a corporation would be. Then the next document would be the limited liability company agreement, sometimes called an operating agreement or an LLC agreement. And that, similar to bylaws and shareholder agreements in a corporation, sets forth how the entity is governed, the relations among the owners. They're generally, LLCs are a lot more flexible than corporations. There's a lot fewer statutory requirements, so you have more freedom to contract to what your company will look like. There are some potential adverse tax consequences that I hope Steve will touch on later. They can be taxed either as partnerships. Generally, they're partnerships unless you elect otherwise. You can check a box to be taxed as a corporation. So that may help on that. Within an LLC, instead of shareholders and directors, you have members who are the owners, like a shareholder, and managers who are kind of the equivalent of the board of directors and the officers. You can still have officers as well as managers. The next group of entities are partnerships, and those include limited and general partnerships. I would say it's rare, if ever, that I've had a foreign entity come in as a limited partnership, never as a general partnership. General partnerships are basically, there's no liability protection. If something goes wrong, the general partners are both fully liable. And in a limited partnership, there's a general partner that, again, is fully liable. So there's no, and you can have an LLC or a corporate entity be the general partner, so you can protect against that. And again, this is all getting a little complicated, but I always say it's rare that we have foreign clients come in as LPs or general partners. The limited partners in a limited partnership, by the way, do have limited liability, similar to members in an LLC and shareholders in a corporation. So another option of doing business in the United States, you don't have to form an entity in the United States. You can come in as your own foreign company and set up a branch or a division in the United States. So that is not a separate legal entity. That's your full company and your officers, directors, owners operating in the US. Again, you could do it, but I think your trusted advisors will tell you to be very, very careful. There's liability that can attach, and it can follow back to the parent company in your foreign country that the corporation or LLC or limited partnership is designed to cut that off at the border. So again, that's unusual. It's not impossible. So just another option for entering the US and I didn't have this in the schedule, but as I was thinking about it this morning, you can also invest in U.S. entities or acquire a U.S. entity. And by doing that, you're investing in an existing entity that's already in Texas or Delaware. They know how the rules and regulations work. So that's another good option. It's something to consider. Next slide, please. I know we're kind of getting tight on time here. So I'll just touch briefly, and I'm a corporate lawyer, business lawyer. I work a lot with lawyers in other specialties that will apply to any company that is already in the United States or is looking to come to the United States. As I'm sure aware, there's immigration. We need visas for either workers, people can be on the ground here. There's a body of contractual law that each contract would be governed by the state that it's entered into. There's amazing lot of tax laws, whether they're federal, state, local, county. Those are things that it's important to work through with your trusted advisors. Next big area, I think, is intellectual property. You want to protect your intellectual property from infringement by others, and you want to make sure you don't infringe on intellectual property of others, whether it's patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets. Labor and employment, having employees in the United States means you're subject to labor and employment laws. So that's another area to keep a close eye on. Product liability is also a little scary in the United States. I think it's worse than other countries. They've got strict liability for some things. So it's important to try and protect your company as best you can. If you've got counterparties, somebody producing something for you, you want to make sure they indemnify you and agree to protect you if you get brought into a lawsuit that's their fault, and make sure you have good insurance in place. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. And Hugo, I think you'll pass the baton. Mil gracias.
Thank you. David, who is next?
Hi, Hugo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bienvenidos a todos. Mi nombre es John Karras. Soy un abogado. Han pasado muchos años que hablo en español. Estoy muy agradecido por esta oportunidad. And that is the extent of my Spanish, and sorry for butchering that. I get to talk about the fun stuff. Everybody kind of wants to know, where's the free money? How can I get help? What's there for me? Is there anything for me? You're going to notice when I go through these slides, there are a lot of extra slides. Some of the comments that came in previously wanted checklists or extra help. And so we're going to touch upon some of these things at a high level, but mostly the overall thing I want you to get from credits and incentives are they're out there. In the United States, there are, as already been alluded to, many different states. Although the United States as a whole, each state can and will offer different credits, different incentives. They want to lure you and your company to their state. So Texas wants to get you before Oklahoma does, or before California, or anything else. The reason is they benefit. When they give you credits, or they negotiate with you for incentives, they benefit from having you there and having your tax base. So overall, everything we want to do when we do these are create our story and our fact patterns so that the states will say yes, give them the reason to. So as we go through these next few slides, I want you to think of Amazon. Everybody knows who Amazon is. They are the ones that deliver the packages with this big smile. And so you want something. A few years ago, and this is going to kind of show you overall what we do with credits and incentives. Amazon came on TV and they said, we're thinking about relocating. We're thinking about building a huge new headquarters here in the US. Who wants us? And so they said, come to us, states, bring me your best offer. And based on that offer, we'll decide where we want to locate. And so all the different states started competing. Well, most people are not Amazon. They need help. So we're going to kind of talk about what is our Amazon. So when we talk about credits and incentives, there are three main types of credits: statutory, negotiated incentives, and these quasi credits. A statutory credit is if you do something, you get X. So you do it, you're going to get it, period. There isn't anything extra you have to do. You just have to meet the requirements. Negotiated incentives are anything you can think of. If you do X, you might get Y. If you do Y, you might get Z. Never know what you're going to get. And you can have two people doing the exact same thing, and one may get incentives and one may not. It's totally up to the person granting those incentives. Now, quasi credits, they're kind of both of those in between. They're a statutory component. You need to do X in order to get this credit. However, there's a gatekeeper. There's someone you have to convince to let you be part of this credit. That's kind of that negotiate. That's why it's a quasi credit and part of negotiated. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so what are some of the benefits? Well, most of our benefits are going to be what most people want: free money. You know, are we getting permanent tax savings? Are we increasing our bottom line? Is our cash flow starting? Can we eliminate or reduce our startup costs? How do we add value? There are also the non-monetary. We might get fast track permitting. Next slide, please, Sarah. All right, so some of these, and what we need to make sure we understand is every state has credits and incentives available. Some states have more, some states have less, but every state has some type of credits and some type of incentive that they want you to come to. Texas is extremely aggressive. They want you to come. The states around Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, they're trying to copy. They want you to choose their state over Texas. But some of these are the common incentives you'll see. Sales and use tax exemption refunds. If you're in manufacturing and production, these are definitely ones you want to look at. Easy credits, those are employment zone credits. Training grants, grants are free money. Property tax abatements and exemptions. Do you want to have to pay property tax? Well, no one does. There are ways to get around that. And then just different ones. There's R&D, research and development credits, employee retention credits. Remember, these states want you to hire or bring employees to their states, and they're going to help you to keep them. Some of these credits you're going to see from a federal level, which Steve may talk about, but they also have the equivalent in a state level. So you can double dip. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so I put this one in. This is one of the local municipalities, the local level that's offering these credits and negotiated incentives in Texas. And I put this in because this is it. This is the whole statute that authorizes them to do and offer you basically anything. And I put in bold at the bottom: to promote state or local economic development and to stimulate business and commercial activity in the municipality. So what does that mean? Next slide, please, Sarah. This is the fun part. Where there's a will, there's a way. That brief couple of words says you can do anything you want in Texas if you can get both parties to agree, right? So that's how you take a common incentive and you turn it into a non-traditional credit incentive, right? So maybe you don't qualify for the statute, for the statutory credit. Maybe your fact pattern is different. Well, you can take that and you can negotiate it and you can get it to qualify. And states and local municipalities want to do this because if they create this tax sharing agreement with you, then it's just you. They don't have to change their laws for everyone. So, you know, I use this example, this picture to show really there's no wall that we can't get through. As long as we're willing, there's a way. And Texas, for example, gives you super broad terms. Now, not all states have those that as broad or aggressive terms as that statute, but all states do have this opportunity. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so what are some of the requirements? Now, you're going to see in here that some of the typical requirements are you creating a new business? Are you buying a new business, investing in a new business? Are you building a new business? Are you bringing a business from Mexico or Latin America into the US? Are you hiring, training new employees? Okay, great. Everyone kind of expects those. Well, then there's also, do you have an existing one? Are you, when you buy or acquire, are you going to realign? Are you going to expand? Are you going to relocate? Are you doing some site selection? Are you purchasing new equipment? Are you hiring, retaining new, cross-training employees? And then, all of these things, basically they want to know, are you going to be in their community or not? In whatever form. Next slide, please, Sarah. Okay, so the next couple of slides are going to be pitfalls. Pitfalls are just hindrances or obstacles that may keep you from getting your credits and incentives. And this is obviously one that people should take into consideration as they're looking for their credits and incentives. 87% of companies are not confident that they're collecting all available incentives. We had an opportunity. So, a little bit about my background. I was in Big Four. So I was working with some of the biggest companies out there, helping them with these credits and incentives. Those companies knew about it. They do it very similar to Amazon, no issues. When we went to mid-market and smaller, many US companies had never heard of these credits or these opportunities. And so we helped them to get them and qualify them. And because they're not aware of what they are, sometimes they're not aware of some of these obstacles. A couple of the biggest ones, you started too late, right? Think about what you're doing. You're leveraging. We will come to your state, your local jurisdiction. We'll bring these jobs. We'll bring these economic multipliers. We'll eat at your sleep at your hotels, eat at your restaurants, buy your gas. We're going to participate and spend money in your area, and you're going to make money off of that and off of us. However, if you say, we like to get something after you already get there, there's no leverage. There's no incentive for them to woo you to their location instead of going elsewhere. So the number one thing you want to do is you want to start the process before you commit to an area. So as you're doing your site selection, like David talking about which state you want to go into, where you want to end up being, you want to start your credits and incentives at the same time. The other one, and many of you, when you do negotiations on your own business, for whatever reason, whatever those first numbers are that you mentioned seem to be locked in stone. So if you come in and you say, we're going to build a $10 million business and hire 100 people, what can you offer us? Down the road, no matter what you do, those are the numbers that are going to stick with them. So just make sure that you have a conservative idea when you start. All right, next slide, please, Sarah. These are just additional pitfalls to look at. And once again, just the facts and circumstances of each individual client determines what's out there and what are the requirements. So just talk these over with your service provider prior to signing anything. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how to avoid those. Almost every pitfall can be avoided if you just take a look at it and address it before you hire, before you make a public announcement, before you sign any lease contracts, before you actually do something set in stone. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next three slides, I think I have a couple minutes. And so I just wanted to highlight just three different ones that are kind of a range opportunities that are available. These are going to be Texas specific for these three, but there are other ones out there for all the other different states. So the Texas Enterprise Zone program, it's going to give you cash in your pocket, $2,500 per employee, whether you hire or retain up to 500 employees. And basically, they're going to do a refund of the state sales and use tax you paid on qualified investments. Super easy to get and qualify for upfront. So just one of those. Now, if you have a large project and you're coming from Mexico or Latin America, you might qualify for the Texas Enterprise Zone grant. You can't have both, but the grant just gives you money to come and invest in the U.S. To, come and bring your employees, bring your job. That's going to be one of those quasi programs, right? Because you have to get them to accept you in, but once you're in, then you're going to get the money. Texas Enterprise Zone, this is also quasi. If you do X and you hire or retain, you get Y. However, there's a gatekeeper. You have to get approved. You have to get scored correctly in order to get approved. And once you're in, then you get it. Next slide, please. All right, so Freeport Exemption, this is one somewhat unique to Texas. And this is going to give you an opportunity to exempt your business personal property tax on inventory, as long as it's only in Texas for a short period. And Texas is the key here. It has to be 175 days or less. And as long as it's then transported outside of the state of Texas, then you're not going to be paying personal property tax on that. Now, not all locations in Texas have it. Every local jurisdiction was able to adopt what part of it they want. And so some will have, some will not. So you have to look. Now, the interesting part with this is a statutory exemption. If you do X, then you get Y. So if you have your inventory and it does leave the state of Texas in 175 days or less, then you don't pay your personal property tax. However, you can also, for those that don't have it, negotiate and get it. I took one of my clients and we were able to negotiate with the local jurisdiction to grant. They did not offer it. And so we created and negotiated. And instead of leaving the state of Texas, we only had to leave their city in order to qualify and get out of the business personal property tax. So in that case, and it only applied to my client. So the city did not have to offer it to anyone else. That was very beneficial to my client. They then moved all their inventory from the 3 different locations they had and stored it, stored it in that city, saving them, in this particular case, they were saving $20 million a year. So Freeport exemption, statutory, but once again, what we talked about, where there's a will, there's a way. You can create the same thing if it's not offered elsewhere. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a property tax exemption. This is just where you can get a full or partial exemption from the property tax on your properties. Statute says you can get up to 10 years and 100% of the increase in appraised value. All right, great. Statutory credit, right? If I have property tax, I can get this. Well, this is one of those things. Remember, it may or may not be. There's kind of a gatekeeper. You got to qualify and get approved. Once again, if you don't, it says 10 years, 100%. Some local jurisdictions will say 7 years, 50%. Some will have a grading scale. Remember, statute says 10 years up to 100%. So that's the first thing. You're going to now take this that's out there as a statutory, and you're going to negotiate and say, regardless of what they're offering, this is what we want. Can we get it? Yeah, yes, no, sometimes. So overall thing, what we have, and remember, these 3 were Texas specific, but they're in all the states. You can get some type of credit incentive in all states. Overall, what I want you to take from this, don't be discouraged if you feel that your fact pattern may not be as great as something else. You never know what the jurisdictions are looking for. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's prestige, sometimes it's just they don't want to lose out to their neighbor. Many of these deals have that human factor. We have gotten better deals when literally there's just a boundary line between one community and the other, and the shop, the plant is now being built across the street. So Mr. Mayor or leader in one jurisdiction has to know he lost. And that was worth a lot to the winning jurisdiction. So you never know what's going to be the deciding factor. So where there's will, there's way, and there's lots of opportunities. I know this was a high level, and there's lots of things out there. So feel free to give us a call if you have any questions. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Now, Steve, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Ugo. And as David and John said, thank you for the opportunity. Our firm is unique in the sense that all we do is focus on helping companies and their owners that are based outside the United States to start business or make investments in the United States. So we are a cross-border international niche firm in this way. So you're the perfect audience we enjoy working with. I wanted to pick up on some of the things that David talked about, as well as some of the things that John talked about. I want to stay high level and just, again, to make you aware of some of the issues that you'll deal with. Many that come from outside the United States, they are intimidated by, and they've heard things about the US tax system that scare them and make them nervous to want to try to do business here. And it is true in the United States that there are a number of different taxes, but at a high level, you have the same kind of taxes in your own country. It's just that maybe we approach some of them differently. For example, in the United States, we have an income tax system, just like you all do. We, though, have income taxes at the federal level, and we have income taxes at the state level that have to be considered. We have payroll and employment taxes that have to be considered just like you do in your home countries. But we have to consider those at the federal level as well as the state level. In your jurisdictions, some of you are used to a VAT, a value-added tax kind of a system on sales of products. In the United States, we do not have a value-added tax per se, but in most states and cities and jurisdictions, we have something called a sales tax, a transaction tax, if you will, if you sell product that has to be considered. As John referenced, if you come to the United States and you acquire or you build a building or you hold land or something like that, there is a property tax that will have to be considered, just like probably in your own country. And another one that is often not thought about, and this last one, is withholding tax on cross-border payments. So let's assume that you decide to invest in the United States or start a business here. And let's suppose that you're very, very successful and you have cash that you would like to get back to your home country, to yourself. One of the things that needs to be considered at the very outset is that the US, just like your home countries, has a withholding tax that will be imposed on those payments. those can be reduced very, very, very substantially if income tax treaties are brought into bear. But you just need to know at the very outset of these these 5 most common taxes that should be considered as you're architecting, as you're sort of planning what your business structure will look like. Next slide, please. I'm often asked, can you give me some of the most, 5 or 10 steps, most common first 5 or 10 steps to take when coming to the United States? And based upon my many years of experience of advising and coaching and helping businesses come here, I've decided in my own mind that probably the first most important thing I would encourage you to do would be to put your ideas, your business plan to writing, and try to be just as detailed as you can in your own business plan. And once you get your business plan, your ideas in written form, I would encourage you to have your home country advisors, your home country colleagues, your friends, whomever, to challenge you, to try to poke holes in your business. Again, it's my own view after a lot of years of practicing, that if you have a solid business idea, the legal side of this and the tax side of this will take care of itself. But if you don't have a great idea and you haven't thought through the details of your idea, then you might be throwing money down the drain. So my first encouragement to you would be the business plan. My second encouragement to you, again, this is based upon years of experience of those who seem to have succeeded, those who did not, is to involve specialists, involve tax and legal specialists like you're hearing today, both in your home country, but also in the United States. As David and John alluded to before, unfortunately, because your situations are unique, there's no checklist out there of a recipe to follow every single step that you have to take in order to establish yourself and succeed here. So what do you do in that case? What you do is surround yourself with smart people in your home country and in the United States. John, for example, introduced an idea that very, very, very few people are aware of, that there's actually opportunities, there's incentives often that are made available for investing here. And who would ever know that unless they had the benefit of an advisor like John that was part of the team? So I strongly encourage home country advisors and US advisors to be involved. Third, as David alluded to, once you've got the business plan and once you've got your advisors surrounding you, you're going to need to decide on an organization structure. In other words, do I need a corporation or a partnership or a limited liability company in the United States? And the best way to approach that is not just to call up Steve Williams or David Wood or John Karras to ask that question, but those who are most successful at their organization structure and achieving tax efficiency are getting their home country contacts at Russell Bedford, for example, and us in the United States working together collaboratively and becoming familiar with your unique structure and exchanging ideas so that we are collectively being able to come up with the most efficient structure for each of you. Again, I can't reiterate enough, each of your situations is going to be different. So your organization structure and what makes sense is going to be different. My fourth step, suggested step, is one to decide and think through your capital structure. And what I mean by that is this. If you're starting in the United States, you're going to have to ask yourself the question, the money that I'm going to have to spend to get started, do I want to put that into the United States in the form of equity? Or do I want to put that into the United States in the form of debt? Or do I want to do it in some combination of the two of these? It seems like it is often a very overlooked kind of question, but it's a very important question from certainly a tax point of view, but also from a legal point of view. It will have tax ramifications. In order to be most tax efficient, usually, not always, but usually, we find that the best capital structure is one that involves a combination of equity as well as debt. Number 5, David touched on the question of states and what state to organize your business in, and then separately, what state to register to do your business in. And he covered that very excellently. I don't need to add to that. After those things are done and your U.S. entity has been organized, the next step that will need to be taken is to make an application to the Federal Internal Revenue Service to apply for a tax identification number. This used to be a very, very easy step, but it is becoming a little bit more challenging because of the U.S.'s interest in you having an individual in the United States that serves as a responsible party is sometimes the word that they used. But once you get the federal tax identification number, then you're in a position where you can open a bank account. Once you have the bank account, then it will be time to set up an accounting system and procedures. During this whole time, you're usually working also with the lawyers to have contracts written with your suppliers, with your other parties that you're working with, any employees, and those kinds of things. And then from the tax and accounting perspective, our high recommendation is when you get to this stage now, just stop and pause and work with your advisors to prepare a calendar that identifies all of the US and state tax returns that need to be filed. Income taxes, payroll taxes, sales tax. Think about all of those and prepare a calendar and identify when those returns need to be filed, as well as the dates by which any associated taxes need to be filed, and get that on the calendar. When you sometimes hear of stories about the difficulty in doing business from a tax point of view in the United States, often it is because there's very, very high penalties that are assessed for being late in filing important tax returns or paying important taxes. These penalties can be huge. They can be very high. On the other hand, it's easy to avoid that if you simply at the very beginning just take the time to have the calendar prepared. Next slide, please. I wanted to make you aware of one opportunity that you are uniquely positioned to enjoy. And I think that many times the foreign investors are not aware of this opportunity. But as a non-US citizen or resident, US federal income tax can sometimes be avoided on the ultimate sale of a US business when you have a non-US shareholder, so a Mexican, a Latin American shareholder. And some years later, let's suppose you've been wildly successful and you sell the stock of that US corporation, and that US corporation does not own US real estate. There is a little known benefit that is out there. If those three situations apply to you, you could make very, very nice profits in the United States and have the gain from the sale of that stock not be subject to US federal income tax if those three criteria apply to you. So this is sort of a parting encouragement for you to consider the opportunity. Some of my clients, if they know about this, they will structure their strategy to try to build up a US business and have its value grow over time, not taking money out while they own it. But some years down the road, they'll reap the benefits when they eventually sell it. And this is a great benefit. Next slide, please. I think this is some of the high points that I wanted to make. And with this, Hugo, I am going to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, guys, for your support today and for this webinar. Now we are going to pass to the section of Q&A. And right now, we have already received some questions from some of the people that that is joining us today. So we have 5 questions, and I'm gonna do the questions, and please, in case, I'm gonna need your support to answer them, okay? So the first question that I have for you guys, how has the new trade agreement with Mexico worked with respect to the previous one? So who can help me with your comments, please?
Thank you very much. So there has been in place previously the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. This agreement was, of course, between the countries of Mexico, United States, and Canada. And the essence of this agreement was to encourage and foster and try to grow trade between our 3 countries. And in order to do that, import duties were reduced or eliminated on virtually all products between the 3 countries. The new agreement that is in place still does the same thing. It essentially reduces or eliminates, continues to eliminate the import duties on most products between the 3 countries. What the agreement really does is try to make the process of trading product between the 3 countries more efficient, easier to do. And so it is a positive. But again, we're still in the same position of it's easy to sell the product between the 3 countries without these import taxes and duties.
Right.
I would just add, anecdotally, I spoke with a client the other day that does a lot of cross-border trade between the US and Mexico, and he said he's not really noticed any hurdles that are new. There are certain industries, and again, it depends on what your specific business is, what your specific company runs like, but there are industries, the auto industry, for example, that I think have changed substantially. So again, further to Steve's point, always talk with your trusted advisors.
Okay, great. The next question that I have for you guys is, well, it is a comment actually from one of our clients. I would like a checklist format to be played during the session of the all permits, certification, and tax procedures that have to be carried out to expand or open operation in Texas or the USA. Maybe you can give us comments about that.
Yeah, so I would say, again, every company is going to be different. So a checklist for one type of business would be very different than the checklist for another. Depending on what nation you're coming from, there may be different tax treaties that we'd want to look at. So we don't really have a checklist per se, but there are really good resources online. The Small Business Administration in the United States has got good information, checklists on how to do business in the US. Each of the states will have their economic development office or their governor's office would put out checklists of how to start a business in the United States. Some of them are geared towards foreign entities specifically. Some are more generic for anybody starting a business. So I'd say there's definitely resources out there. And again, you know, working with your trusted advisors, both in your home country and your US counselor accountants, we can put together a good checklist. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Actually, we have a new question that we have already received in our chat. En caso de que alguien esté interesado en hacer alguna otra pregunta, por favor, pueden hacerla a través del chat e intentaremos contestarla. Y si no la podemos contestar ahora, seguro les estaremos enviando una respuesta a su correo electrónico. Marcos Hernández Rivas nos menciona, regarding the exportation through electronic e-commerce and through Amazon and other marketplaces, do you recommend to incorporate a society in the United States, a legal entity?
This is a very excellent question, and again, where more needs to be done. But one of the things to address that specific question to make you aware of is that obviously business is changing very rapidly. It used to be taxation was driven, the income taxation was driven based upon where you were physically located. But in the case of electronic commerce or Amazon type of trade, you don't necessarily have an office or a warehouse or business in the different states. And so there is changing law that's taken place in the United States in the different states to where if you have a certain level of just economic revenue or activity occurring in a state, you could be subject to taxation there. So there's no way to just generalize and give an answer to this specific question. But the fact that they've identified this as a question is impressive to me alone. And at the very least, you might need to register to do business in certain states, even though you might not have people or an office there. But it's a good question. The advisors will have to take up with you.
Yeah, for sure. Marco, si por favor pudieras darnos tu correo electrónico en el chat y con todo gusto contestaremos tu pregunta a través de correo. Well, we have a next question, please. What is the first thing that I should consider to expand my business in the US?
Well, at least for my own checklist, I suggested the first thing you consider is your business plan and then have it challenged. But if I would just refer you back to the list of points on my thing is have the business plan, make sure that you have good advisors in your home country as well as the United States. No doubt about it. Those are my first top two recommendations. And then after that, then start to seek advice on what the legal organization structure should look like, your capital structure, and so forth.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. The next question is, my interest is to become an investor in the United States, and I want to know what amount is necessary for me to be considered as such by the government of that country.
Yeah, this is also an excellent question and one that we are asked very frequently. As I'm sure you're very well aware, it is difficult for individuals under the current, particularly the prior regime and also the current regime, to get visas for individuals to come into the United States. Now, some have heard about a visa program that's available in the United States for making investment. Now, I am not an immigration attorney. I should hasten to say this, but I have a lot of clients that come and they've heard about this. And they say, if I invest money into the United States, will I be guaranteed to get a visa? And I would say this is where we must involve another immigration specialist into this, because it's not a guarantee. I have a client who started 5 years ago, and all they had was an idea. And they have prospered very, very much. They now are making over $100 million of revenue in the business. They would like themselves individually to be able to immigrate to the United States. And so they involved an immigration attorney to ask if they could get one of these investor visas. And unfortunately, even as successful as their business has been, the immigration attorney has not yet been successful in getting them that type of visa. So although the program is there, it's not easy. It's not as easy as, unfortunately, what we would hope it would be.
Okay, Steve. Well, we have a final question. Who can help me? We are considering expanding our operation to the US by investing in productive operations.
Good. Welcome. You should. With that being said, this is such a broad topic. It actually incorporates everything that Steve was saying, that David was saying, and that I was saying. You really want to get on top of it at the beginning, right? You want to make sure that you've done your site selection. You know where you want to go based on kind of the things that David mentioned. You know, what state do you want to be in? What local jurisdiction you want to be in? What entity formation you want to be in? You know, if you look at Steve's checklist, his first two options would be, you know, crucial. What's your business plan? How does it succeed? And who's on your team to help direct you where you want to go? You know, in the US, one of the most challenging things when you come in is, unlike dealing with one country, which the United States is, it's almost like you're dealing with 50 separate ones, just from getting kind of set up. Each state, although similar, has those nuances that make it just a little bit tricky to make sure you're doing it right. So if you get everyone in before, and you're looking at your site selection, your entity formations, your economic benefits, what one can offer versus the other, and depending upon your type of business, what are you producing, what are you manufacturing? Some states might be a better fit. And then you have your logistics stuff as well. You know, do you need to come in? Do you need air, rail? You know, what are those things? Those all will be part of your business plan. But that would be my advice for that.
Yes. Thank you very much, John.
And a couple of things I saw kind of sub questions on that question that sent around. There, as we discussed earlier, there definitely are a lot of resources in the US to encourage you both at the federal level and at the state level. So there are manuals, guides with recommendations on things you need to do, details on local, state, federal regulations, environmental, taxes. There's a lot of resources available that your team, both in Mexico or Latin America and in the US, can help you with.
Great, David. We are almost concluding. So I think Sarah wants to give us some comments. Please, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Sí, nada más quisiera, I'm going to say that in Spanish. Just, quisiera ponernos a sus órdenes, decirles que nosotros podemos ayudarles con todas las cosas que necesiten para la creación de su empresa o traer su empresa a Estados Unidos. Les podemos ayudar a buscar los recursos necesarios para que ya sea que tengan un negocio nuevo o compren un negocio ya existente o quieran expandirse, necesiten un abogado de inmigración. Podemos ayudarles a tener todo ese equipo que necesitan para poder hacer sus inversiones. Y pues con toda confianza pueden comunicarse conmigo en español y podemos atenderlos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Sara. So, does anybody has an additional final comment to this webinar, guys?
Sí, muchas gracias para todos, Hugo, Sara, todos en Russell Bedford y mis compadres Esteban y Juan. Mil gracias.
Gracias, David.
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to helping you, any of you that are considering this to make investment in the United States. Our little firm serves, well, we have mid-market companies like the one I referred to that make over 100 million, but many of our clients are smaller businesses or making investment in real estate. In fact, I think our plan is, Hugo, sometime in the fall to have another webinar just on investing in real estate in the United States. We can touch on this. But our industry focus primarily is on companies who are doing manufacturing. Distribution is another one, software, real estate, and services. Probably for our firm, those are the 5 most common areas that we particularly practice in. But if it's outside that, we're happy to involve other people who've got the expertise that we do not. But again, welcome any questions from any of you if we can be assistance as you're exploring making investment in the United States.
Yes, Steve, thank you that you mentioned that. I'm going to say that in Spanish. Continuando con esta serie de webinars que nosotros tenemos con la firma PWA, con John y con David, Sara, tendremos un webinar adicional antes de que termine el año. Ya hemos realizado uno previo y estaremos enfocados en real estate. Y como ha mencionado Steve, tal vez existan algún par de tópicos adicionales como software o e-commerce que alguno de nuestras personas de la audiencia han mencionado que les gustaría escuchar algo de esta información de Estados Unidos. Para cerrar, les comento que es muy importante, como dijimos al inicio, que si ustedes tienen alguna duda, por favor, no duden en contactarnos y lo principal es que busquen a sus especialistas. No cualquier persona o cualquier abogado o firma puede decirles que al final pueden completar su proceso para abrir o expandir su negocio en Estados Unidos. El equipo que está hoy aquí en nuestro webinar son profesionales, se dedican a esto y lo único que les podemos decir es que no existe un checklist, pero que si tienen alguna duda, con todo gusto podremos ayudarles, ¿ok? Les agradecemos mucho su estancia hoy o su visita hoy en este webinar y nos vemos pronto. Steve, John, David, Sara, muchas gracias. Que estén muy bien. Hasta luego.
Gracias. Tengan buen día.
Gracias, Hugo.
Igual.
Hasta luego.
Bye bye.